The gunshot that killed Hannah's husband echoed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. Even though 3 years had passed since that October morning in 1873, when her world shattered into pieces, she never thought she could put back together. She stood in the doorway of her small ranch house outside Trinity, Texas, watching dust clouds rise from the horizon as riders approached, and her hand instinctively moved to the rifle she kept by the door because trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. The riders numbered 3, and as they drew closer, Hannah could make out the lead man's broad shoulders and the easy way he sat his horse, like he was born in the saddle. Her neighbor, old Cyrus Webb, had mentioned that the new ranch hand he hired came highly recommended from up north. But Hannah made it a point not to get involved with strangers anymore. She had learned that lesson the hard way when she trusted the wrong people, and it cost her everything that mattered. The riders passed her property without stopping, heading toward the Webb ranch that bordered her land to the east. Hannah watched them go, her green eyes narrowed against the bright Texas sun, her auburn hair pulled back in a simple braid that hung down between her shoulder blades. At 26 years old, she ran her small cattle operation alone, refusing help from anyone who offered it. The townspeople of Trinity called her stubborn, but she called it survival. Later that afternoon, as she mended a section of fence that her cattle had damaged, Hannah heard the sound of a horse approaching. She straightened, wiping the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, and turned to see one of the riders from earlier sitting atop a chestnut mare about 20 feet away. He was younger than she expected, maybe 28 or 29, with dark brown hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore typical ranch clothes, nothing fancy, and his hands rested easily on his saddle horn as he regarded her with an expression that seemed more curious than threatening. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that suggested he came from further south. "Name's Jacob Vance. I'm working for Mr. Webb now. He asked me to ride over and let you know we'll be moving some cattle near the property line tomorrow, in case you hear any commotion." Hannah kept her expression neutral, though she appreciated the courtesy. Most ranch hands wouldn't have bothered to give warning. "Appreciated," she said shortly, turning back to her fence. "That post is set too shallow," Jacob said, not moving from his spot. "Another good push from a steer and it'll come right back out." Hannah's jaw tightened. "I've been fixing fences for 3 years. I think I know what I'm doing." "Didn't mean any offense," Jacob replied calmly. "Just an observation." She turned to face him fully, her hands on her hips. "Mr. Vance, I don't recall asking for your opinion on my fence work. You delivered your message, so unless you have other business here, I have work to finish before sundown." Something flickered in Jacob's eyes, but he simply touched the brim of his hat with 2 fingers. "Yes, madam. Good day to you." He turned his horse and rode away without looking back, leaving Hannah standing there feeling strangely unsettled by the encounter. That evening, as she sat on her porch eating a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Hannah found herself thinking about Jacob Vance despite her best efforts not to. There had been something different about him, a quietness that seemed genuine rather than calculated. But she had thought the same thing about Thomas once, back when she first met him in Missouri, before she knew about his gambling debts and the dangerous men he owed money to. Before she knew that marrying him would mean running from one town to another, always looking over their shoulders, until finally those men caught up with them in Kansas and put a bullet in Thomas's chest, while Hannah hid in a root cellar, listening to him die. She pushed the memories away and went inside, barring the door as she did every night. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams she tried to forget by morning. 2 weeks passed before she saw Jacob Vance again. She had ridden into Trinity to buy supplies, her wagon rattling along the dusty Main Street past the general store, the saloon, the blacksmith shop, and the small church that served the growing community. Trinity had been nothing but a crossroads when Hannah first arrived, but it was expanding rapidly as more settlers came to Texas seeking their fortunes. She preferred it when the town was smaller and quieter, but progress waited for no one. As she climbed down from her wagon in front of the general store, a commotion near the saloon caught her attention. 3 men were harassing a young Mexican woman, blocking her path and laughing as she tried to move around them. Hannah recognized the type immediately, drifters who caused trouble and moved on before facing consequences. Most people on the street were pretending not to notice, unwilling to get involved. Before Hannah could decide whether to intervene, Jacob Vance stepped out of the general store and took in the scene. He set down the supplies he was carrying and walked toward the men with a purposeful stride that suggested he had no intention of being ignored. "Gentlemen," Jacob said, his voice carrying clearly in the afternoon air, "the lady is trying to go about her business. I suggest you let her pass." The largest of the 3 men, a bearded brute with tobacco-stained teeth, turned to Jacob with a sneer. "Suggest all you want, cowboy. This ain't your concern." "I'm making it my concern," Jacob replied evenly. "Now step aside." The bearded man took a step toward Jacob, but before the situation could escalate further, the town marshal, Bill Garrett, emerged from his office across the street. "There's a problem here," Garrett called out, his hand resting on his gun belt. The 3 drifters exchanged glances, clearly calculating whether the confrontation was worth the trouble. Finally, the bearded man spat in the dust and jerked his head toward his companions. "Come on. This town's too boring anyway." They mounted their horses and rode out, leaving the young woman looking shaken but unharmed. Jacob touched his hat to her. "You all right, miss?" she nodded, murmuring her thanks in accented English before hurrying away. Jacob watched her go, then turned and nearly walked into Hannah, who had been observing the entire encounter from beside her wagon. "Mrs. Kimball," he said, looking genuinely surprised to see her. "Didn't notice you there." "You made yourself a target with those men," Hannah said, though she wasn't sure why she felt compelled to point it out. "They'll remember your face." "Maybe," Jacob acknowledged, "but I'll remember theirs too, so I suppose we're even." "That's not how it works," Hannah said, shaking her head. "Men like that, they hold grudges. They wait until you're alone and vulnerable, then they strike." Jacob studied her face for a long moment, and Hannah had the uncomfortable sensation that he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "You speak from experience," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Hannah felt her chest tighten. "I need to get my supplies," she said, moving past him toward the store entrance. "Mrs. Kimball," Jacob called after her, and something in his tone made her pause. "If you ever need help with anything at all, my offer stands." No strings attached. She looked back at him, this man who had worked for her neighbor for only 2 weeks but somehow kept crossing her path. "I don't need help, Mr. Vance. I've managed fine on my own." "I know you have," he said simply. "Doesn't mean you always have to." Hannah went into the store without responding, her heart beating faster than she cared to admit. She had built walls around herself for good reason, and she had no intention of letting anyone breach them, no matter how kind their eyes or sincere their words. She had fallen for kindness before, and it had cost her everything. The rest of the afternoon passed uneventfully. Hannah loaded her supplies into her wagon and drove back to her ranch, pushing thoughts of Jacob Vance from her mind as she focused on the work that needed doing. Her small herd required constant attention, and she had learned to do the work of 3 people by herself through sheer determination and stubbornness. It wasn't easy, but nothing about her life had been easy since she lost Thomas, and she had made peace with that reality. 3 days later, a summer storm rolled across the plains with the fury that only Texas weather could muster. Hannah had managed to get her cattle into the protected canyon on the western edge of her property before the worst of it hit, but she spent a sleepless night listening to thunder shake her small house and watching lightning illuminate her windows like midday. When dawn finally broke, she pulled on her boots and went out to assess the damage. The storm had knocked down part of her barn, scattering lumber across the yard and crushing the chicken coop beneath a fallen beam. Miraculously, the chickens had escaped unharmed, now wandering loose around the property. The main house had held up well enough, but the barn would need significant repairs, and Hannah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her as she contemplated the work ahead. She spent the morning clearing debris and salvaging what lumber she could reuse. By noon, her arms ached and her hands were raw despite her work gloves. She was hauling a particularly heavy beam when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She looked up to see Jacob Vance riding toward her property, leading a pack horse loaded with tools and fresh lumber. He reined in near where she stood and dismounted without waiting for an invitation. "Mr. Webb saw the damage from his property," Jacob explained. "He sent over some supplies and asked me to help with repairs." Hannah straightened, pushing her hair out of her face. "That's kind of Cyrus, but I can manage." Jacob looked at the destroyed barn, then back at her. "Mrs. Kimball, I don't doubt you can manage. But this is going to take you days to rebuild alone, and you've got cattle to tend and a ranch to run. I'm here, I've got the supplies, and I know how to swing a hammer. Seems foolish not to accept the help." "I don't accept charity," Hannah said firmly. "It's not charity," Jacob replied. "It's being neighborly. You'd do the same if the situation was reversed, wouldn't you?" Hannah wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. If Cyrus Webb's barn had been damaged, she would have ridden over to help without a second thought, because that was how people survived out here. Still, accepting help meant letting someone into her space, lowering her guard, and that terrified her more than she wanted to admit. "Fine," she said finally, "but I work alongside you. I don't sit idle while someone else does my work." "Wouldn't expect anything different," Jacob said, and she thought she detected a hint of amusement in his voice. They worked together throughout the afternoon, clearing debris and setting new posts for the barn frame. Jacob proved to be a skilled carpenter, measuring and cutting with practiced efficiency. Hannah matched his pace, refusing to show any weakness even when her muscles screamed in protest. They spoke little, but the silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward, filled only with the sounds of hammering and sawing. As the sun began to set, they had made significant progress on the frame. Hannah stepped back to survey their work, surprised by how much they had accomplished in just one afternoon. "We did good work today," she said, more to herself than to Jacob. "We make a good team," Jacob replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. He started gathering his tools, preparing to leave. "Mr. Vance," Hannah said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Thank you. For today." He looked at her, and there was something warm in his expression that made her chest feel tight. "You're welcome, Mrs. Kimball. I'll come back tomorrow if that's all right with you. We should be able to finish the frame and get the roof on within a few days." Hannah nodded, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering dusk. She stood there for a long time after he disappeared, wondering why his presence had made her feel both safer and more vulnerable at the same time. The next day, Jacob returned as promised, and they fell into a working rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. As they worked, they began to talk, sharing small details about their lives. Hannah learned that Jacob was from Louisiana originally, that he had learned carpentry from his father before the war, that he had come to Texas seeking a fresh start after losing his family farm to debt. He spoke matter-of-factly about his hardships, without bitterness or self-pity, and Hannah found herself respecting him for it. She shared less about herself, revealing only that she had been married and widowed, that she had come to Texas 3 years ago, that she preferred working with her hands to sitting idle. Jacob didn't press for more information, seeming to understand that some stories were too painful to tell, at least not yet. By the third day, the barn was taking shape, the new frame solid and true. They were working on the roof when Jacob suddenly said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Hannah felt her defenses rise immediately. "You can ask," she said carefully. "I might not answer." "Fair enough," Jacob acknowledged. He was quiet for a moment, focusing on the beam he was securing. "Why did you come to Texas? You mentioned you were widowed, but you didn't say where it happened." Hannah's hands stilled on the nails she was holding. She had known this question would come eventually, but that didn't make it easier to answer. "Kansas," she said finally. "My husband was killed in Kansas. I came to Texas because I needed to be somewhere that didn't remind me of him every minute of every day." "I'm sorry," Jacob said quietly. "That must have been hard." "It was," Hannah replied, her voice tight. "Still is some days. How long were you married?" 2 years, Hannah said. She climbed down from the roof, suddenly needing distance from the conversation. "I should check on the cattle." Jacob didn't follow her, and she was grateful for that small mercy. She walked to the canyon where her herd grazed, taking deep breaths of the hot Texas air and trying to calm the emotions churning in her chest. She had been doing so well at keeping her past locked away, but Jacob's simple questions had cracked open the door she worked so hard to keep closed. When she returned to the barn an hour later, Jacob was still working on the roof, his movements steady and sure. He glanced down when he heard her approach but didn't comment on her absence. Instead, he said, "I think we can finish this tomorrow. You'll have a solid barn again." "Thank you," Hannah said. She hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry I left so abruptly. Some topics are difficult for me." "I understand," Jacob said, climbing down to stand beside her. "We all carry scars, Mrs. Kimball. Some are just more visible than others." That night, as Hannah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she thought about Jacob's words. She had been so focused on protecting herself from future pain that she had forgotten what it felt like to connect with another person. Jacob made her feel things she thought had died with Thomas, and that realization both thrilled and terrified her. The next morning, Jacob arrived early to finish the barn. They worked side by side, the July heat intense and unrelenting, but neither complained. When they finally nailed the last board into place and stepped back to admire their work, Hannah felt a genuine smile cross her face for the first time in longer than she could remember. "It's perfect," she said, running her hand along the smooth wood. "Better than it was before the storm." "You did most of the work," Jacob said. "I just pointed you in the right direction occasionally." Hannah laughed, a sound that surprised her. "That's not true and you know it. I could never have done this alone, not this quickly." Jacob turned to face her, his expression serious. "Mrs. Kimball, can I speak plainly with you?" Hannah's smile faded. "I suppose so." "I know you value your independence," Jacob began. "I respect that, but independence doesn't have to mean isolation. You don't have to carry everything alone." "I've managed fine for 3 years," Hannah said, her defenses rising again. "I know you have," Jacob replied, "but managing isn't the same as living. You're so busy protecting yourself from getting hurt again that you're not letting yourself have any joy either." Hannah felt anger flare in her chest. "You don't know anything about my life or what I've been through." "You're right," Jacob said calmly. "I don't know the details, but I know loss. I know what it's like to shut yourself off from the world because it feels safer than risking more pain. I spent 2 years doing exactly that after I lost my farm and my mother died. It wasn't until I came to Texas and started over that I realized I was already dead inside. I just hadn't laid down yet. His words hit Hannah with unexpected force. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but she couldn't because deep down, she knew he was speaking the truth. She had been merely existing for 3 years, not truly living, and she hadn't even realized it until this moment. I don't know how to do anything different, she admitted quietly, the confession feeling like a defeat. You start small, Jacob said. You let people help you sometimes. You say yes to an invitation for dinner instead of always saying no. You take a risk on trusting someone, even if it scares you. Hannah looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her life only a few weeks ago but who seemed to understand her better than people who had known her for years. And what if I get hurt again? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you'll survive it just like you survived before, Jacob said. But what if you don't get hurt? What if something good happens instead? Isn't that possibility worth the risk? Hannah wanted to say no, wanted to retreat behind her walls where it was safe. But looking into Jacob's honest eyes, she found herself wanting to try. I don't know if I can do this, she said. You don't have to decide anything right now, Jacob replied. Just think about it. He gathered his tools, preparing to leave. Oh, and Mrs. Kimball, there's a church social on Saturday evening. It would be nice to see you there. He mounted his horse and rode away before Hannah could formulate a response. She stood in front of her newly rebuilt barn, watching dust rise from his horse's hooves, feeling more confused and conflicted than she had in years. The next 2 days passed slowly. Hannah went about her usual routines, tending her cattle, maintaining her property, cooking her solitary meals. But Jacob's words echoed in her mind, refusing to be silenced. She thought about the life she had been living, always alone, always guarded, always afraid. Was this really how she wanted to spend the rest of her years? Saturday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that offered some relief from the July heat. Hannah stood in front of her small mirror, debating whether to go to the church social. She had attended a few community gatherings when she first arrived in Trinity, but after people kept trying to set her up with various widowers and bachelors, she had stopped going. It was easier to stay home than to constantly fend off unwanted attention, but Jacob's invitation had been different. He hadn't pressured her or made assumptions. He had simply extended an offer and left the choice entirely in her hands. That small gesture of respect meant more to Hannah than he probably realized. Before she could talk herself out of it, Hannah changed into her better dress, a simple blue cotton that she hadn't worn in over a year. She brushed out her auburn hair and pinned it up in a style that was practical but prettier than her usual severe braid. Looking at her reflection, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. When had she become so hard, so closed off? When had she stopped caring about anything beyond mere survival? The ride into Trinity took 30 minutes, giving Hannah plenty of time to second-guess her decision. By the time she arrived at the church, people were already gathering in the yard behind the building, where tables had been set up with food and lanterns hung from the trees. Music drifted through the air, someone playing a fiddle while children ran around laughing and playing tag. Hannah climbed down from her wagon, suddenly feeling conspicuous and uncertain. She was about to turn around and leave when she heard a familiar voice. "Mrs. Kimball, you came." Jacob appeared at her elbow, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed. He looked genuinely pleased to see her. "I almost didn't," Hannah admitted. "But you did," Jacob said. "That's what matters." He offered her his arm. "Come on, let me introduce you to some people." Hannah hesitated only briefly before taking his arm. They walked together into the gathering, and Jacob introduced her to several ranch families she had never properly met. To her surprise, people were friendly and welcoming, not intrusive or pitying as she had feared. A woman named Sarah Miller, who ran the boarding house in town, immediately engaged Hannah in conversation about a new recipe for peach cobbler, while Sarah's husband discussed cattle prices with Jacob. As the evening progressed, Hannah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. The food was delicious, the music was lively, and the company was pleasant. She caught Jacob watching her several times, and each time he would smile in a way that made her feel warm inside. When the dancing started, Hannah hung back, content to watch from the sidelines. But Jacob had other ideas. He appeared before her and extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor of this dance, Mrs. Kimball?" Hannah's first instinct was to refuse. "I haven't danced in years," she protested. "Neither have I," Jacob replied. "We can be rusty together." Despite her reservations, Hannah placed her hand in his and let him lead her to where other couples were dancing. The fiddle player struck up a waltz, and Jacob placed one hand on her waist, the other holding her hand gently. They began to move, and Hannah was surprised to find that her feet remembered the steps even if her mind had forgotten. "See," Jacob said quietly, "some things you never really forget." As they danced, Hannah became acutely aware of how close they were, of Jacob's hand on her waist, of the way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way, and she felt something in her chest crack open, something she had been keeping locked away for 3 long years. When the music ended, they stepped apart, but Jacob kept hold of her hand for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for the dance," he said. "Thank you for asking," Hannah replied, her voice slightly breathless. They spent the rest of the evening together, talking and laughing in a way that felt both foreign and wonderful to Hannah. She learned more about Jacob, about his love of horses, his skill with carpentry, his quiet faith that had sustained him through difficult times. She found herself sharing more about her own life too, small details she hadn't told anyone in years. As the social wound down and people began heading home, Jacob walked Hannah to her wagon. The moon was bright overhead, casting silver light across the churchyard. "I'm glad you came tonight," Jacob said. "So am I," Hannah admitted. "I had forgotten what it felt like to be part of a community." "You don't have to be alone, Hannah," Jacob said, using her first name for the first time. "There are people here who would welcome your friendship if you let them." Hannah looked up at him, this man who had somehow slipped past her defenses without her even noticing. "I'm scared," she confessed. "I'm scared of getting hurt again. I'm scared of trusting someone and having them let me down. I'm scared of losing someone I care about." "I know," Jacob said softly. He reached out and gently took her hand. "But I want you to know something. I'm not going anywhere. I know you've been hurt, and I know you need time to learn to trust again. I'll wait as long as it takes." The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a pledge. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in Jacob's voice. "What if it takes a very long time?" she whispered. "Then it takes a long time," Jacob replied simply. "I'm a patient man, Hannah, and I think you're worth waiting for." Hannah didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the vulnerability of caring about someone again. But a larger part of her wanted to stay, to take the risk, to see where this connection with Jacob might lead. "I can't make you any promises," she said finally. "I'm not asking for promises," Jacob replied. "I'm just asking you to give us a chance. That's all." Hannah took a deep breath, feeling like she stood at a crossroads. She could choose safety and loneliness, or she could choose risk and possibility. "All right," she said quietly. "A chance, but slowly." Jacob's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Slowly is just fine with me. He helped her into her wagon, his hand lingering on hers for just a moment. "Good night, Hannah." "Good night, Jacob," she replied, and as she drove her wagon away from the church, she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Over the following weeks, Jacob became a regular presence in Hannah's life. He would ride over to her ranch every few days, ostensibly to check on the barn repairs or help with some task that needed doing. But Hannah knew the real reason was simply to spend time with her. She found herself looking forward to his visits, planning her day around them, feeling disappointed on the days when he couldn't come. They developed an easy friendship, talking about everything and nothing as they worked side by side. Jacob told her about his childhood in Louisiana, about learning to read by candlelight, about his father's dream of building a legacy to pass down to his children. Hannah found herself sharing memories of her own childhood in Missouri, of her mother's garden, of her father's stories, of the girl she had been before life hardened her. She also began, slowly and carefully, to tell Jacob about Thomas, about how they had met at a church picnic, about how charming and exciting he had seemed, about how she had fallen in love with his smile and his promises of adventure. And then, haltingly, about the gambling debts, the running, the fear that had become their constant companion, and finally, the terrible morning when men with guns found them in Kansas. "I hid," Hannah said, the shame of it still fresh even after 3 years. "Thomas told me to hide in the root cellar, and I did. I heard the gunshots, heard him fall, and I didn't do anything. I just hid there like a coward until they were gone." "You survived," Jacob said gently. "That's not cowardice, Hannah. That's doing what you had to do." "I should have helped him," Hannah insisted, tears streaming down her face. "I should have done something." "And then they would have killed you too," Jacob pointed out. "Thomas gave you a chance to live. Honoring that gift by surviving isn't something to be ashamed of." His words didn't erase Hannah's guilt, but they eased it somehow, making it a little more bearable. She realized that she had been carrying this weight alone for too long, that sharing it with someone who listened without judgment made it lighter. As August arrived, bringing with it scorching heat and cloudless skies, Hannah noticed changes in herself. She smiled more easily. She slept better at night. She started accepting invitations to community gatherings, getting to know her neighbors, building friendships she had denied herself for years. And at the center of it all was Jacob, steady and patient, keeping his promise to wait as long as it took. One evening, as they sat on Hannah's porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jacob said, "I need to tell you something." Hannah felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. "What is it?" "I've been saving money," Jacob began. "Mr. Webb has been good to me, paying fair wages and giving me extra work when he can. I've got enough now to put a down payment on a small piece of land. There's a property for sale about 5 miles south of here, just 40 acres, but it has good water and grazing." "That's wonderful," Hannah said, genuinely happy for him. "You'll have your own place." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," Jacob said, turning to face her. "I don't want my own place, not really. What I want is a life with you, Hannah. I know it's only been a few months, and I know you need more time, but I wanted you to know my intentions. I'm not just passing through. I'm building a future here, and I'd like that future to include you whenever you're ready." Hannah's heart hammered in her chest. She had known this conversation was coming eventually, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. "Jacob, I care about you. You know I do, but I'm not sure I'm ready for what you're talking about." "I know," Jacob said calmly. "Like I said, I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand, what I'm working toward. I'll wait as long as it takes, Hannah. A few months, a year, 5 years if that's what you need. I've found something special with you, and I'm not going to let it go just because the timing isn't perfect." Hannah felt tears welling in her eyes. "How can you be so sure? How can you know that I'm worth all this waiting?" Jacob reached over and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "Because when I'm with you, I feel like myself again. You make me want to be better, to build something meaningful, to have a future worth planning for. I haven't felt that way since before I lost everything in Louisiana. You brought that back to me, Hannah, and that's not something I take lightly." Hannah leaned into his touch, letting herself feel the warmth of his hand against her skin. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," Jacob replied, "but I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." They sat together as darkness fell, not talking, just being present with each other. Hannah felt something shift inside her that night, a wall coming down brick by brick, making room for the possibility of love again. September brought cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn. Jacob purchased his 40 acres and began the work of building a small house and barn. Hannah found herself riding over to his property often, ostensibly to offer advice or help, but really just to be near him. They would work together clearing land and setting fence posts, and Hannah marveled at how natural it felt to be his partner in this endeavor. One afternoon, as they took a break from work and sat under the shade of an old oak tree, Jacob said, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" Hannah asked, passing him the water canteen. "I want to raise horses," Jacob said. "Good horses, the kind people can depend on. There's a growing market for quality stock, especially with all the new ranches starting up around here. With my carpentry skills, I could build a decent stable, and with your knowledge of cattle, you could help me understand the business side of things." Hannah felt a warmth spread through her chest at the casual way Jacob included her in his plans, not presuming but hoping. "That sounds like a good venture," she said carefully. "Horses are valuable and good ones are hard to come by. Would you want to be part of it?" Jacob asked directly. "Not now necessarily, but someday when you're ready." Hannah looked out at the land Jacob had purchased, imagining what it could become. She pictured a stable full of strong horses, a house with a garden, a life built on hard work and mutual respect. And standing at the center of it all was Jacob, patient and steady, waiting for her to be ready. "Maybe someday," she said softly. "I think I'd like that." Jacob's smile was radiant. "Then I'll keep working toward it," he said. "No rush, no pressure, just something to think about." As October approached, marking 3 years since Thomas's death, Hannah found herself reflecting on how much had changed. She still thought about her late husband sometimes, but the memories no longer brought the crushing grief they once had. She had begun to accept that loving Thomas and moving forward with her life weren't mutually exclusive. She could honor his memory while still allowing herself to be happy again. The anniversary of Thomas's death fell on a Tuesday. Hannah woke that morning feeling melancholy, and she went about her chores with a heavy heart. She hadn't told Jacob about the significance of the date, not wanting to burden him with her grief. But when he arrived at her ranch that afternoon, he took one look at her face and seemed to understand that something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked gently, tying his horse to the porch rail. Hannah sat down on the steps, suddenly exhausted. "3 years ago today, Thomas died," she said quietly. "I thought I was past this, but it still hurts." Jacob sat down beside her, close but not touching. "Grief doesn't have a timeline," he said. "You loved him. That doesn't just disappear because time passes." "I feel guilty," Hannah admitted. "I feel guilty for being happy with you when he's gone. I feel guilty for moving on, like I'm betraying his memory somehow." "Hannah, look at me," Jacob said, and she turned to meet his eyes. "Loving someone who's gone doesn't mean you can't love again. Your heart is big enough for both. Thomas would want you to be happy, wouldn't he?" Hannah thought about it, really thought about it. Thomas had been many things, flawed and troubled and deeply in debt, but he had loved her in his own way. In those last moments before the men arrived, he had tried to protect her, to give her a chance to survive. Would he want her to spend the rest of her life alone and grieving? Yes, she said finally. He would want me to be happy. Then let yourself be happy, Jacob said simply. Not for me, not for anyone else, but for yourself. You deserve that, Hannah. They sat together in silence as the afternoon faded into evening. Jacob didn't try to cheer her up or distract her from her memories. He simply stayed beside her, a quiet presence that asked for nothing but offered everything. And Hannah realized in that moment that she was falling in love with him, that maybe she had been falling in love with him for months without fully admitting it to herself. "Thank you for being here," she said as the stars began to appear overhead. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," Jacob replied, and Hannah knew he meant it. As autumn deepened and November arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional rain, Hannah felt the last of her walls crumbling. She found herself thinking about a future with Jacob, imagining what it would be like to wake up beside him every morning, to build a life together, to face whatever challenges came their way as a team rather than alone. But there was still a part of her that held back, afraid to fully commit. The scars from her past ran deep, and even though she trusted Jacob more than she had trusted anyone in years, the fear of loss still haunted her. One evening in late November, as they worked together to move Hannah's cattle to winter pasture, a sudden storm rolled in faster than they had anticipated. Thunder boomed overhead and lightning split the sky as rain poured down in sheets. They managed to get the cattle secured before racing back to Hannah's house, arriving soaked to the bone and shivering. Hannah quickly built up the fire in the stove while Jacob tended to the horses, making sure they were safely in the barn. When he came back inside, his clothes were dripping and his teeth were chattering. Hannah grabbed a blanket and handed it to him. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," she said. "You'll catch your death." Jacob nodded, and Hannah turned away to give him privacy while he changed. She went to her bedroom and changed into dry clothes herself, then put on a pot of coffee to warm them both. When she came back out, Jacob was sitting by the fire wrapped in the blanket, his wet clothes hung up to dry. "That was quite a storm," he said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered him. "They come up fast this time of year," Hannah replied, sitting down beside him. They listened to the rain hammer against the roof and the wind howl around the house. "It's a good thing we got the cattle moved when we did." "We make a good team," Jacob said, echoing the words he had spoken months ago when they first worked together on the barn. "We do," Hannah agreed. She took a sip of her coffee, gathering her courage for what she wanted to say next. "Jacob, can I tell you something?" "Of course," he said, turning to look at her. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what I want my life to look like," Hannah began. "For 3 years, I've been so focused on just surviving, on protecting myself from being hurt again, that I forgot to think about actually living. But you changed that. You showed me that it's possible to be cautious and brave at the same time, to protect your heart while still leaving it open to possibility." Jacob set down his coffee cup, giving her his full attention. "Hannah, let me finish," she said gently. "I know I've asked you to be patient, and you have been more patient than I had any right to expect. You've waited for me to be ready, never pushing, never demanding, just being there day after day. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. I think maybe I've been in love with you for months, but I was too scared to admit it, even to myself." Jacob's eyes were bright in the firelight. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I'm ready," Hannah replied, her voice steady despite the emotion churning in her chest. "I'm ready to stop being afraid. I'm ready to build a life with you, to be your partner in every way. I'm ready to trust again." Jacob reached out and took her hands in his. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. If you need more time, I meant what I said. I'll wait as long as it takes." "I'm sure," Hannah said, and she realized it was true. The fear was still there, lurking in the corners of her mind, but it no longer controlled her. "I love you, Jacob Vance. I want to marry you. I want to build a future with you. I want to raise horses and cattle and maybe someday children. I want all of it with you." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you too, Hannah Kimball. I have loved you since the first day I saw you fixing that fence, so stubborn and independent and strong. You are the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and I promise you, I will spend every day proving that your trust in me is well placed." Hannah tilted her face up and kissed him, a kiss full of promise and hope and new beginnings. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, they were warm and safe and together, exactly where they were meant to be. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. Hannah woke to find Jacob still there, having stayed when the rain made it impossible to return to his own property. They had talked late into the night, making plans for their future, and Hannah felt a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. Over breakfast, they discussed practical matters. "We should probably wait until spring to get married," Jacob suggested. "That gives us time to finish my house and get everything in order." "Spring sounds perfect," Hannah agreed. "That way we can have a proper wedding, invite the whole community. I'd like Sarah Miller to be there and Cyrus Webb and all the people who have been kind to me." "Whatever you want," Jacob said, smiling at her across the table. "This is your day as much as mine." "Our day," Hannah corrected. "Everything from now on is ours together." They spent the day working on Jacob's property, Hannah offering suggestions on the house layout and where to put the stable. It felt natural and right to be planning this together, to be building something that would belong to both of them. As they worked, Hannah found herself laughing more than she had in years, feeling genuinely happy and at peace. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Trinity. When Hannah went to town the following week, she was greeted with congratulations and well wishes from everyone she encountered. Sarah Miller hugged her tightly and immediately began planning a wedding celebration. Cyrus Webb shook Jacob's hand and told him he was getting a fine woman. Even Marshall Garrett stopped by to offer his congratulations, saying it was good to see Hannah smiling again. The months that followed were busy but joyful. Jacob worked tirelessly on finishing his house, with Hannah helping whenever her own ranch duties allowed. They decided that after the wedding, Hannah would sell her small property to a young couple just starting out and move to Jacob's land, where they would build their horse ranch together. Winter passed into spring, bringing with it warm breezes and wildflowers that carpeted the Texas plains in brilliant colors. Jacob's house was finished by March, a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch and enough bedrooms for the family they hoped to have someday. The stable was completed as well, ready for the horses they planned to purchase after the wedding. As their wedding day approached in late April of 1874, Hannah found herself reflecting on the journey she had taken. A year ago, she had been isolated and alone, convinced that she would never trust anyone again. Now she was preparing to marry a man who had shown her that patience and genuine love could heal even the deepest wounds. The night before the wedding, Sarah Miller hosted a small gathering for Hannah at the boarding house. Several women from the community attended, bringing gifts and advice for the new bride. Hannah accepted their kindness with grace, feeling genuinely part of this community in a way she never had before. "You look happy," Sarah observed as they sat together later in the evening. "Truly happy," I am, Hannah replied. I didn't think I could feel this way again, but Jacob showed me it was possible. He's a good man, Sarah said. Patient and kind. Those are rare qualities. I know, Hannah agreed. I'm very lucky. The wedding took place on a beautiful Saturday afternoon at the church in Trinity. The whole town seemed to turn out for the celebration, filling the small church to capacity. Hannah wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her make, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Jacob had picked that morning. As she walked down the aisle, Hannah's eyes found Jacob standing at the altar, looking handsome in his best suit. The love and pride shining in his eyes took her breath away. When she reached him and took his hand, she felt a sense of rightness settle over her. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When it came time for their vows, Jacob spoke first. Hannah, I promise to love you faithfully, to support your dreams, to be patient with your fears, and to stand beside you through whatever life brings our way. I promise to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me every single day. Hannah's voice was steady as she spoke her own vows. Jacob, I promise to love you with an open heart, to be your partner in all things, to trust you with my fears and my hopes, and to build a life with you based on honesty and respect. Thank you for waiting for me, and for showing me that love is worth the risk. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed Hannah tenderly, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, ready to face their future as one. The celebration that followed was joyous and lively. Tables had been set up behind the church, laden with food that the community had prepared. There was music and dancing, laughter and storytelling. Hannah danced with Jacob, with Cyrus Webb, with Marshall Garrett, and with several other men from town. She felt light and free. All the weight she had carried for so long finally lifted from her shoulders. As the sun began to set, and the celebration wound down, Jacob and Hannah climbed into a wagon decorated with ribbons and drove to their new home. When they arrived, Jacob carried Hannah over the threshold, both of them laughing as he nearly dropped her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," Jacob said, setting her down gently in the front room. "It's perfect," Hannah said, looking around at the home they would share. "Everything is absolutely perfect." That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Hannah felt a completeness she had never experienced before. Jacob held her close, and she realized that this was what love was supposed to feel like. Safe and exciting, comfortable and thrilling, grounded and infinite all at once. "Are you happy?" Jacob asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Hannah replied honestly. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I never would have given up on you," Jacob said. "I told you I'd wait as long as it takes, and I meant it." "I know," Hannah said, snuggling closer to him. "That's why I love you." The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work and simple joys. They purchased their first breeding horses in June, a magnificent stallion named Thunder and 3 quality mares. Jacob proved to have a natural gift for training, working with the horses with patience and skill. Hannah handled the business side of things, keeping accounts and negotiating sales with the precision she had learned running her own ranch. By autumn, they had their first foals on the ground, and the Vance Horse Ranch was beginning to build a reputation for quality stock. Ranchers from across the region started coming to look at their horses, impressed by the animal's temperament and conformation. In November, Hannah realized she was pregnant. She told Jacob on a crisp evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Jacob's face transformed with joy. "A baby, really?" "Really," Hannah confirmed, laughing at his excitement. "Sometime in late spring, I think." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "This is the best news I've ever had," he said. "We're going to be parents. Are you scared?" Hannah asked, because she certainly was. "A little," Jacob admitted, "but mostly I'm just grateful. Grateful for you, for this life we've built, for this child we'll welcome into the world." Hannah's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Jacob was attentive and protective, insisting she take on lighter duties as her belly grew. Hannah protested at first, but eventually accepted his care with good humor. They spent the long winter evenings preparing for the baby, with Jacob building a beautiful cradle from oak wood, and Hannah sewing tiny clothes and blankets. In May of 1875, after a long but uncomplicated labor, Hannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Jacob Vance, honoring both Hannah's past and their present. When Hannah held her son for the first time, she felt a fierce love that overwhelmed her, and she understood in that moment that her heart had indeed grown large enough to hold all the love in her life. Her memories of her first husband, her deep love for Jacob, and now this new, all-consuming love for her child. "He's perfect," Jacob said, gazing down at his son with wonder. "He looks like you. He has your eyes," Hannah replied softly. "Look how dark they are." They spent hours just watching their baby sleep, marveling at the miracle of his tiny fingers and toes. Hannah felt a completeness she had never imagined possible, all the broken pieces of her life finally fitting together into something beautiful and whole. The years that followed were full and rich. Little Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. The horse operation continued to thrive, with the Vance Ranch becoming known throughout Texas for producing exceptional stock. Hannah and Jacob worked side by side, equal partners in every aspect of their life. In 1877, Hannah gave birth to twin girls, whom they named Emily Rose and Sarah Grace. The twins were a handful, keeping both parents busy, but they brought even more joy and laughter into the household. Thomas took his role as big brother seriously, always watching over his little sisters with a protective devotion that reminded Hannah of Jacob. By 1880, the Vance Ranch had expanded significantly. They now had over 100 acres, a large stable, and a growing herd of quality horses that commanded premium prices. Jacob had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and Hannah had become an astute businesswoman, her reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spreading far beyond Trinity. One evening in late summer, as Hannah and Jacob sat on their porch watching their 3 children play in the yard, Jacob said, "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Hannah smiled, reaching over to take his hand. "All the time. Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life. Any regrets?" Jacob asked. Hannah thought about it, really thought about it. "Not a single one," she said finally. "Everything I went through, all the pain and fear and loss, it led me here to you, to this life, to our children. I wouldn't change any of it. Even the hard parts," Jacob pressed gently. "Especially the hard parts," Hannah replied. "They made me who I am. They taught me to value what I have, to not take love for granted, to be strong enough to take risks again." Jacob brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You are the strongest person I know," he said, "and the bravest. It takes real courage to trust again after being hurt." "I had a good teacher," Hannah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You showed me that patience and genuine love could heal anything. You waited for me when I needed time, and you never made me feel rushed or pressured. That gift of time and space was what I needed to heal." "I would have waited forever," Jacob said simply. "You were worth it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, their children's laughter filling the air. Hannah felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life she had been given, for the second chance at happiness that she had almost been too afraid to take. In 1882, the Vance family celebrated a milestone when Thomas turned 7 and started attending the new school that had been built in Trinity. The town had grown considerably in the years since Hannah first arrived, now boasting a proper school, a doctor's office, 2 general stores, and even a small hotel. The church where Hannah and Jacob had married had been expanded to accommodate the growing congregation. Hannah had become an integral part of the community, serving on the school board and helping organize various church and town events. She had formed deep friendships with several women in town, particularly Sarah Miller, who had become like a sister to her. The isolation and loneliness of her early years in Texas seemed like a distant memory now, replaced by connection and belonging. The twins started school in 1884, and Hannah found herself with more free time than she had had in years. She used it to expand her role in the horse ranch, developing a breeding program that focused on producing horses with exceptional temperaments as well as strong physical attributes. Her insights and instincts proved valuable, and the Vance horses became even more sought after. One day in the spring of 1885, as Hannah was working in the stable, she heard a commotion outside. She walked out to find Jacob standing in the yard, talking to a well-dressed man she didn't recognize. As she approached, the man turned to her with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Vance, I presume," he said. "My name is William Hartford. I'm a horse breeder from Kentucky, and I've heard impressive things about your operation here." "Welcome to our ranch," Hannah said, shaking his hand. "What brings you all the way to Texas?" "I'm looking to purchase breeding stock to improve my own program," Hartford explained. "Your horses have a reputation for intelligence and trainability that's rare in the market. I was hoping to purchase several mares and possibly arrange for breeding rights to your stallion." Hannah glanced at Jacob, who gave her a slight nod, deferring to her expertise. She and Hartford spent the next 2 hours walking through the stable, discussing bloodlines and breeding strategies. By the end of the afternoon, they had negotiated a substantial sale that would bring a significant amount of money into the ranch and further enhance their reputation. After Hartford left, Jacob swept Hannah into a hug. "You were magnificent," he said. "The way you negotiated that deal, your knowledge of every horse in our stable, your vision for the breeding program. I am so proud of you." Hannah laughed, feeling pleased by his praise. "We make a good team," she said, repeating the phrase that had become something of a motto for them over the years. "The best team," Jacob agreed, kissing her soundly. That evening, after the children were in bed, Hannah and Jacob sat on their porch as they often did, reflecting on the day. "I was thinking," Jacob said, "maybe it's time to expand again. We could purchase that land to the south, build a second stable, really grow this operation into something substantial to pass on to our children." "I like the sound of that," Hannah said. "Thomas is already showing an interest in the horses, and the twins are still young enough that they could grow up learning the business from the ground up. We've built something good here," Jacob said, "something lasting." Hannah looked out at the land they had cultivated together, the stable they had built, the home they had filled with love and laughter. "We have," she agreed. "And it all started because you had the patience to wait for a scared, broken woman to learn to trust again." "You were never broken," Jacob said firmly. "Hurt, yes, scared, absolutely, but never broken. You were always whole, Hannah. You just needed time to remember that." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at his words. Even after all these years, Jacob still had the ability to see into her heart and understand exactly what she needed to hear. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Jacob replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. The ranch expanded as they had planned, becoming one of the largest and most respected horse operations in Texas. Thomas grew into a capable young man who shared his father's skill with horses and his mother's head for business. The twins developed into strong, independent young women who could ride as well as any man and who had inherited their mother's determination. In 1890, Hannah and Jacob celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. Their children had planned a surprise party, inviting friends and neighbors from all over the region. As Hannah stood in her home, surrounded by people she loved, she marveled at how much her life had changed since that day in 1873 when she first arrived in Trinity, broken and alone. "Thank you all for coming," Hannah said when it was time to cut the cake. "Jacob and I are blessed beyond measure to have such wonderful family and friends. This community has given us so much over the years, and we are grateful for every bit of it." Jacob stepped forward and put his arm around her waist. 16 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Hannah has been my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. I thank God every day that she gave me a chance, that she was brave enough to trust again, and that she allowed me to be part of her journey. Hannah leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "And I thank God for a man who had the patience to wait as long as it took," she said. "Who showed me that love didn't have to be scary, that trust could be earned through consistent action and genuine care. Jacob gave me the greatest gift anyone can give, time to heal and the space to find myself again." The party continued late into the night, filled with music and dancing and celebration. As Hannah danced with Jacob, she thought about the scared, guarded woman she had been when they first met, and the confident, happy woman she had become. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken time, patience, understanding, and a man who was willing to wait as long as it took. By 1895, both Thomas and the twins were young adults. Thomas, at 20, had taken over much of the day-to-day operation of the horse ranch, showing a natural talent for breeding and training that exceeded even his father's considerable skills. Emily had married a neighboring rancher's son, a good young man who treated her with respect and kindness. Sarah had decided to pursue teaching, attending a training program in Dallas and returning to Trinity to teach at the school her mother had helped establish. Hannah and Jacob, now in their late 40s, found themselves with more time than they had had in years. They used it to travel occasionally, visiting other horse ranches and learning new techniques to bring back to their own operation. But mostly they enjoyed the simple pleasure of each other's company, the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived, and a love that had weathered all storms. One evening in the spring of 1896, as they celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary quietly at home, Jacob said, "Do you remember that day after the storm, when you finally told me you were ready to trust again?" "Of course I remember," Hannah said. "It was one of the most important days of my life." "I think about it sometimes," Jacob said. "How close I came to never knowing you, never having this life. If you had stayed locked behind those walls, if I had given up on waiting, none of this would exist." "But you didn't give up," Hannah pointed out. "You kept your promise. You waited as long as it took." "It was the easiest promise I ever kept," Jacob said, "because from the moment I met you, I knew you were worth waiting for. I would have waited 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime if that's what you needed." Hannah moved closer to him on the porch swing they had added to the porch years ago. "I'm glad it didn't take that long," she said with a smile. "But knowing you would have waited, that's what made it possible for me to take the risk. You gave me the safety I needed to be brave." "You gave yourself the courage to try again," Jacob corrected gently. "I just provided the space for that courage to grow." They sat together as the stars came out overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative steps toward each other all those years ago. Hannah thought about the journey they had taken together, from strangers to friends to partners to lovers to spouses to parents. Every step had built on the one before, creating a foundation strong enough to support a lifetime of love. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" Hannah asked. "What's that?" Jacob replied. "That I didn't let fear win," Hannah said. "I was so scared after Thomas died. Scared to trust, scared to love, scared to even hope for happiness again. I could have stayed in that fear for the rest of my life, and no one would have blamed me. But you showed me that there was another way, that I could honor my past while still embracing my future." "You did that yourself," Jacob insisted. "I just reminded you what was possible." "You did more than that," Hannah said firmly. "You showed me what real love looks like. Patient, consistent, genuine love that doesn't waver or demand or pressure. You loved me at my worst and waited for me to find my best. That's a gift I can never fully repay." "You repay it every day," Jacob said, pulling her close. "Every morning I wake up beside you, every smile you give me, every moment we share, that's all the repayment I could ever want." They kissed then, a kiss that held 22 years of love and commitment and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, Hannah rested her head on Jacob's shoulder, feeling completely at peace with her life and her choices. The years continued their steady march forward. In 1898, Emily gave birth to Hannah and Jacob's first grandchild, a baby girl named Hannah after her grandmother. Hannah held her tiny namesake and felt the circle of life complete itself, the love she had been given flowing forward into a new generation. Thomas married in 1899, choosing a kind young woman from a neighboring ranch who shared his love of horses. The wedding was a grand affair, held at the church in Trinity, with the entire community in attendance. As Hannah watched her son exchange vows with his bride, she thought about her own wedding day all those years ago, about the leap of faith she had taken in trusting Jacob with her heart. Sarah continued teaching, becoming one of the most respected educators in the region. She never married, choosing instead to dedicate herself to shaping young minds and building a legacy of knowledge rather than children. Hannah supported her daughter's choice completely, understanding that there were many ways to live a meaningful life. By 1900, the Vance Ranch had become one of the premier horse operations in all of Texas. Buyers came from as far away as California and New York to purchase their stock. The operation employed a dozen men full-time and provided a good living for multiple families in the Trinity area. Hannah and Jacob had achieved a level of success they could never have imagined in those early days when they were just starting out. But success, Hannah had learned, wasn't measured only in acres owned or horses sold or money earned. Real success was measured in love given and received, in relationships nurtured and maintained, in a life lived with integrity and purpose. By those metrics, she and Jacob were the wealthiest people in Texas. In 1902, as Hannah and Jacob celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary, they decided to host a large party at the ranch, inviting everyone who had been part of their journey. The celebration was enormous, with over 200 people in attendance. Neighbors, friends, business associates, family members, all gathered to honor the couple who had become pillars of the Trinity community. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Hannah and Jacob stood together in their yard, looking at the home they had built, the land they had cultivated, the legacy they had created. Their children and grandchildren were inside, laughing and talking, the sound of family filling the air. 28 years, Jacob said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime. It has been a lifetime, Hannah said. The best lifetime I could have asked for. Any regrets? Jacob asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. Not a single one, Hannah replied, as she always did. Well, maybe one small regret. Jacob looked at her in surprise. What's that? That I didn't trust you sooner, Hannah said with a smile. That I made you wait so long before I was ready. That's not a regret, Jacob said, pulling her close. That was time you needed, time that made everything that came after even more precious because it wasn't rushed or forced. I told you I'd wait as long as it takes, and I meant it. Every day of waiting was worth it for the lifetime we've built together. Hannah kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into that simple gesture. When they finally pulled apart, she said, I love you, Jacob Vance. Thank you for seeing past my fear to the woman I could become. Thank you for being patient when I needed patience, for being strong when I needed strength, for being constant when I needed stability. Thank you for waiting as long as it took. I love you too, Hannah Vance, Jacob replied. Thank you for taking a chance on me, for trusting me with your heart, for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for being brave enough to try again. They stood together under the stars. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from broken pieces, who had proven that patience and genuine love could overcome even the deepest wounds. Their story was one of heartbreak and healing, of fear conquered by courage, of walls broken down by persistent kindness. As they walked hand in hand back to their home, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the scared, wounded woman who had arrived in Trinity in 1873, determined never to trust anyone again. She thought about the patient cowboy who had looked at that broken woman and seen someone worth waiting for. She thought about all the moments in between, the small steps and giant leaps, the setbacks and triumphs, the tears and laughter. And she thought about the promise Jacob had made all those years ago. I'll wait as long as it takes. 5 simple words that had changed the course of her entire life, that had given her the safety she needed to risk her heart again, that had led to 28 years of happiness and counting. In the years that followed, Hannah and Jacob continued to thrive. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated new births and marriages, mourned losses and celebrated victories. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming a legacy that would extend for generations. But more importantly, their love continued to deepen, growing richer and more profound with each passing year. In 1905, as they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered to honor them. Thomas, now a successful rancher in his own right, stood to give a toast. To my parents, he said, raising his glass, you taught me what real love looks like. Not the passionate, fleeting kind that burns bright and fades fast, but the steady, enduring kind that weathers all storms and only grows stronger with time. You showed me that patience is a form of love, that waiting for the right person at the right time is always worth it. Thank you for being the example I needed. Emily spoke next, tears in her eyes. Mama, when I was growing up, I remember asking you how you knew Papa was the right one. You told me that he was the man who loved you enough to wait as long as it took for you to be ready. That he never pressured you or made you feel rushed, but simply stood beside you and let you heal at your own pace. That's the kind of love I looked for, and that's the kind of love I found. Thank you for setting the bar so high. Sarah was last. Papa, you taught me that real strength isn't about force or dominance, but about patience and persistence. You waited for Mama when anyone else would have given up. You believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. You gave her the time and space she needed to heal. That lesson has shaped how I approach my teaching, how I treat my students, how I live my life. Thank you for showing me what it means to truly honor someone." By the time the children finished speaking, both Hannah and Jacob had tears streaming down their faces. They stood together, holding hands, overwhelmed by the love in the room and the legacy they had created not just in business but in relationships and values. "Thank you," Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. Our children, our grandchildren, our friends. You have given us more joy than we ever thought possible." Jacob and I didn't have an easy road to this point. We both came to our marriage carrying wounds and scars, but we chose to heal together, to build something beautiful from broken pieces. And now, looking around this room at all of you, I see the fruits of that choice. I see love multiplied and extended, values passed down, legacy secured. This is what makes life meaningful. Jacob squeezed her hand and spoke. "Hannah is the bravest person I know. It takes real courage to love again after being hurt, to trust again after being betrayed, to open your heart again after it's been broken." She did all of those things, and in doing so, she didn't just change her own life. She changed mine. She changed our children's lives, and she changed the lives of everyone in this room. That's the power of choosing courage over fear, hope over despair, love over isolation. The celebration continued late into the night, a joyful gathering of multiple generations united by the love that Hannah and Jacob had built. As Hannah looked around at the faces of her family and friends, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and completion. This was what she had been so afraid to hope for all those years ago. Belonging, connection, love that multiplied rather than diminished. Later, as she and Jacob prepared for bed, Hannah said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different? If I had refused your help with the barn, if I hadn't come to that church social, if I had stayed locked behind my walls?" "Sometimes," Jacob admitted. "But then I remember that some things are meant to be. I believe we were meant to find each other, Hannah. Maybe not in some predetermined fate kind of way, but in the sense that we both needed exactly what the other could offer. You needed someone patient enough to wait while you healed. I needed someone strong enough to show me that taking risks on love was worth it." "We saved each other," Hannah said softly. "We did," Jacob agreed. "And we continue to save each other every day in small ways and large. That's what partnership means." They climbed into bed, fitting together as naturally as they had for over 3 decades. Hannah rested her head on Jacob's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the sound that had become her favorite music. "I'm glad you didn't give up on me," she whispered. "I never would have," Jacob replied, kissing the top of her head. "I told you I'd wait as long as it takes, and I meant it. You were worth every moment of waiting." As Hannah drifted off to sleep, she thought about the long journey from fear to trust, from isolation to connection, from mere survival to true living. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been quick, but it had been worth every difficult moment. Jacob had given her the greatest gift one person could give another, the time and space to heal at her own pace, without pressure or demands. The years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm of seasons and celebrations. In 1910, Hannah and Jacob celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch had become a true family operation, with Thomas running the day-to-day business and his own children learning the trade, just as he had learned from his parents. Hannah, now in her early 60s, had stepped back from the heavy physical labor but remained deeply involved in the business side of operations. Her mind was as sharp as ever, and her reputation in the horse breeding community was unparalleled. Buyers still sought her advice and expertise, valuing her insights developed over decades of experience. Jacob, also in his early 60s, had slowed down a bit as well but still spent his days working with the horses he loved. He had developed a training program that produced some of the finest working horses in Texas, animals known for their intelligence, temperament, and reliability. His methods were studied and copied by trainers throughout the region. One warm evening in June of 1910, Hannah and Jacob sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter filling the air with joy. Hannah watched them with a contented smile, marveling at how much her life had changed since that frightened, wounded woman first arrived in Trinity all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, taking her hand in his. "Everything," Hannah replied. "Our whole life together. How far we've come, how blessed we've been." "We have been blessed," Jacob agreed, "more than I ever dared to hope for." "Do you remember what you said to me that night after the church social?" Hannah asked. "When I told you I was scared." "I said I'd wait as long as it takes," Jacob replied immediately. "I remember every word of that conversation." "Those words changed my life," Hannah said. "They gave me permission to take my time to heal at my own pace. They showed me that love didn't have to be rushed or forced, that someone could care about me enough to let me find my way back to trust in my own time." "You did the hard work," Jacob pointed out. "I just provided the space for it." "You did more than that," Hannah insisted. "You showed me every single day, through your actions and your words, that you were trustworthy. You proved that not all men were like Thomas, that not all love ends in heartbreak. You were consistent and steady and patient, and that's what allowed me to take the risk of opening my heart again." Jacob pulled her closer, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "We were good for each other," he said. "We both needed someone who understood that healing takes time, that trust must be earned, that love grows deeper when it's given room to develop naturally." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had cultivated together for nearly 4 decades. Hannah thought about all the moments that had brought them to this point. The barn raising after the storm, the church social where she had taken the first tentative step toward connection, the night she finally told Jacob she loved him, their wedding day, the births of their children, the growth of their ranch, the countless ordinary days that had woven together to create an extraordinary life. "Jacob," Hannah said softly. "Yes, my love, thank you," she said simply, "for everything. For seeing past my fear to the woman I could become, for being patient when I needed patience, for loving me even when I didn't know how to love myself, for building this beautiful life with me." "Hannah," Jacob replied, his voice full of emotion, "you don't need to thank me. Loving you, waiting for you, building this life with you, it's been the greatest privilege of my existence. You made me a better man. You gave me a family, a legacy, a purpose. If anything, I should be thanking you." "Then let's call it even," Hannah said with a smile. "We saved each other and we built something beautiful together." "Deal," Jacob agreed, sealing the pact with a kiss. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Hannah reflected on the wisdom she had gained through her journey. She had learned that healing couldn't be rushed, that trust must be earned through consistent action over time, that real love was patient and kind and willing to wait. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite fear. She had learned that opening your heart again, after being broken, was the bravest thing anyone could do. Most importantly, she had learned that the right person would wait as long as it took, would give you the time and space you needed, would prove through daily actions that they were worthy of your trust. Jacob had been that person for her, and she thanked God every day for bringing him into her life. In the years that followed, Hannah and Jacob continued to be the heart of their growing family. They celebrated weddings and births, comforted during illnesses and losses, offered wisdom and guidance when asked. Their love story had become something of a legend in Trinity, the tale of the wounded widow and the patient cowboy who waited as long as it took, proof that genuine love could overcome even the deepest wounds. By 1915, they had been married for 41 years, a testament to the strength of a foundation built on patience, trust, and mutual respect. They had weathered droughts and storms, economic downturns and personal losses, but through it all, their love had remained constant, the bedrock upon which everything else was built. One evening, as they celebrated their 41st anniversary with their extended family, one of their great-grandchildren, a precocious little girl of 6, asked, "Great-grandma, how did you know great-grandpa was the one you should marry?" Hannah smiled at the innocent question, seeing in the child's eyes the same curiosity she had once felt about life and love. She glanced at Jacob, who nodded encouragingly, and then she said, "Well, sweetheart, when I met your great-grandfather, I was very sad and scared. I had been hurt badly, and I didn't think I could ever trust anyone again. But your great-grandfather didn't push me or rush me. Instead, he said something very important. He said, 'I'll wait as long as it takes,' and he meant it. He gave me the time I needed to heal, and he proved every single day that he was someone I could trust. That's how I knew he was the one, because he loved me enough to wait." The little girl thought about this for a moment, then said, "That must have taken a very long time." Hannah laughed. "It did take some time," she admitted. "But it was worth every moment because it meant that when we did get married, I was ready. I wasn't scared anymore. I could give him all of my heart because he had proven he would take care of it." Jacob added, "And your great-grandmother gave me something just as valuable. She showed me that some things are worth waiting for, that patience is a form of love, and that the best things in life are the ones you have to work for. We built something together that has lasted over 40 years, and it all started because we were both willing to take our time and do things right." The children and grandchildren listened to their story, many hearing details they had never known before. Hannah saw understanding dawn in their eyes, the realization that true love wasn't just about passion and romance but about patience, trust, commitment, and daily choosing to honor and respect your partner. As the party continued around them, Hannah and Jacob slipped away to their porch, seeking a moment of quiet together. They sat on the swing that had become their favorite spot, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. 41 years, Hannah said wonderingly. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it's been that long." "Best 41 years of my life," Jacob replied, "and I'm looking forward to many more." "Me too," Hannah agreed. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the contentment that came from a life well lived and a love well nurtured. "You know what I realized today?" "What's that?" "That the waiting, the time I needed to heal and trust again, it wasn't wasted time. It was necessary time. If we had rushed into things before I was ready, we might not have made it. But because you gave me the space to heal at my own pace, when we did come together, it was right. It was solid. It was built to last." "I never saw it as wasted time," Jacob said. "I saw it as an investment in our future. Every day I waited was a day you were healing, growing stronger, learning to trust again. And when you finally said yes, I knew it was real. I knew you meant it with your whole heart, not just part of it." "I did mean it with my whole heart," Hannah confirmed. "And I still do. Every day I choose you. Every day I'm grateful that you had the patience to wait as long as it took." They sat together as the night deepened around them, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it. Their story wasn't one of love at first sight or whirlwind romance. It was a story of patience and healing, of trust earned and carefully nurtured, of two broken people choosing to build something beautiful together. As the years advanced into the 1920s, Hannah and Jacob began to slow down even more, but their minds remained sharp and their love remained strong. They had handed over the day-to-day running of the ranch to Thomas and his children, but they remained involved, offering advice and guidance when requested. Their legacy was secure, not just in the successful business they had built, but in the values they had instilled in their children and grandchildren. In 1924, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a golden milestone that brought family and friends from across Texas to honor them. The celebration was grand, held at the ranch with hundreds of people in attendance. Politicians, business leaders, neighbors, and family members all came to pay tribute to the couple who had become an institution in Trinity. During the celebration, the mayor of Trinity gave a speech honoring Hannah and Jacob for their contributions to the community. "These two people," he said, "have shown us what it means to build something lasting. Their ranch provides employment for dozens of families. Their horses are known throughout the country for quality and reliability. But more than that, they have shown us what real love looks like. They have demonstrated that patience, trust, and commitment can overcome any obstacle. They are living proof that taking the time to do things right leads to results that last a lifetime." When it was Hannah and Jacob's turn to speak, they stood together, hands clasped, facing the crowd of beloved faces. Hannah spoke first. "50 years ago, I married the best man I've ever known. I was damaged and scared, convinced I could never trust anyone again. But Jacob saw past my fear to the person I could become. He gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me: time. Time to heal, time to grow, time to learn to trust again. And because he gave me that gift, we were able to build something that has lasted half a century and will endure long after we're gone." Jacob picked up where she left off. "Hannah is the bravest person I know. It takes real courage to love again after being hurt, to take a risk on someone new when you've been betrayed. She could have stayed locked behind her walls, safe but alone. Instead, she chose to try again, to open her heart one more time. And in doing so, she gave me the greatest gift of my life. We built this together, all of it: the ranch, the family, the legacy. Every bit of it was a team effort, and I couldn't be prouder of what we've accomplished." The crowd erupted in applause, many people wiping tears from their eyes. The celebration continued long into the night, filled with music and dancing and joy. Hannah danced with Jacob, their movements slower than they once were, but no less meaningful. As they swayed together to a gentle waltz, Hannah thought about all the dances they had shared over 50 years, and she knew that this love, this partnership, was the truest thing she had ever known. Later, as they finally made their way to bed, exhausted but happy, Jacob said, "50 years, Hannah. We did it." "We did," Hannah agreed, settling into his arms with the ease of long practice. "And if I had it to do all over again, I wouldn't change a single thing." "Not even the parts where I had to wait," Jacob teased gently. "Especially not those parts," Hannah said seriously. "That waiting, that patience you showed me, it's what made everything else possible. It gave us the foundation we needed to build a love that would last a lifetime." Jacob kissed her forehead. "I love you, Hannah Vance, today, tomorrow, and for whatever time we have left." "I love you too, Jacob Vance," Hannah replied. "Thank you for waiting as long as it took. Thank you for showing me that love could be safe and steady and true. Thank you for this beautiful life." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, just as they had done for 50 years. Two souls perfectly matched, two hearts beating as one. The final years of their lives were peaceful and content. They spent their days surrounded by family, watching their great-great-grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once played. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of the younger generations, the legacy they had built extending far into the future. In 1928, Jacob passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, with Hannah beside him. She grieved deeply, missing the partner who had stood by her side for over 5 decades. But she also celebrated the incredible life they had built together, the love they had shared, the family they had created. And she knew with absolute certainty that choosing to trust Jacob, choosing to take a risk on love again, had been the best decision of her life. Hannah lived for 3 more years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, sharing stories of her life with Jacob, and passing down the wisdom she had gained. She spoke often about the importance of patience, trust, and giving people the time they need to heal. She told her descendants about the scared young widow she had once been, and the patient cowboy who had waited as long as it took, proving through daily actions that he was worthy of her trust. When Hannah passed away in 1931 at the age of 78, she died knowing that her life had been full and meaningful, that she had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. Her final words were simple: "Tell Jacob I'm coming home." She was buried beside Jacob on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the wide Texas sky they had both loved. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription: Hannah and Jacob Vance. They built a love that lasted a lifetime, proving that patience and trust can overcome any obstacle. Together 1874–1928, but their story didn't end there. The ranch they built continued for generations, a testament to what 2 people could accomplish when they chose patience over rushing, trust over fear, love over isolation. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren all carried forward the lessons Hannah and Jacob had taught them about the value of waiting for the right person, of giving people the time they need, of building relationships on a foundation of trust earned through consistent action. In Trinity, Texas, the story of Hannah and Jacob Vance became legend, passed down through generations as proof that true love was worth waiting for, that healing couldn't be rushed, and that sometimes the best things in life came to those who were patient enough to wait as long as it took. Young people in town would hear the story and understand that real love wasn't just about passion and romance, but about patience, commitment, and choosing each other every single day. The Vance Ranch stood for over 100 years, a physical reminder of what Hannah and Jacob had built together. Even when it was eventually sold to new owners in the 1970s, the legacy of the couple who had started it all remained, their story an inspiration to everyone who heard it. Hannah had been afraid to trust again after losing Thomas, convinced that opening her heart would only lead to more pain. But Jacob had shown her that love didn't have to hurt, that the right person would give you the time and space you needed, that patience was one of the highest forms of love. When he said, "I'll wait as long as it takes," he hadn't just spoken words. He had made a promise and kept it, day after day, week after week, month after month, until Hannah's heart finally healed enough to risk loving again. And in that waiting, in that patience, in that steady, unwavering commitment, they had built something that transcended their individual lives. They had created a love story for the ages, proof that the best things in life are worth waiting for, that trust must be earned and carefully nurtured, and that 2 people who choose each other every day can build a legacy that lasts forever. Their story ended not with a dramatic flourish, but with quiet contentment, with grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around, with a ranch that would stand for generations, with a love that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. It was the ending Hannah had never dared to hope for when she first arrived in Trinity, broken and afraid. But because one cowboy had the patience to wait as long as it took, and because one wounded woman found the courage to trust again, they had written a love story that would inspire people for generations to come.